So let's start by setting the stage. Literally. Before almost every major dance performance, you're likely to see dancers backstage rehearsing their choreography right before they're about to perform. Now, not long into that rehearsal, they might turn to their friend in a panic and say, "Wait, what was the choreography?" Now, from an outsider's perspective, this might not seem to make any sense, as the dancers have been training for a long time and it would seem impossible to forget the choreography. Now, this begs the question, how do dancers learn choreography with ease, and how might dancers forget that choreography right before they're about to perform? So, how does one learn dance choreography and go from this, learning choreography for the first time and in-studio rehearsals, to this, an on-stage perfect performance? So to begin, we have to go back to our classic multi-store model of memory. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, there is both a short-term and long-term memory store. Our short-term memory can hold a small amount of information for a relatively short period of time, and its capacity is 7 plus or minus 2 chunks or pieces of information. And this limited capacity explains why dancers start by slowly learning the choreography in small sections. Now, the goal of all relevant information is to make your way from the short-term memory into your long-term memory. And our long-term memory holds information for an infinite period of time to essentially create permanent memories. So let's walk through transferring choreography into our long-term memory. So we start with verbal and visual instructions of how our body should move, and the process of taking in this information is called encoding. Encoding will take that information into our short-term memory store. Now, keeping in mind that short-term memory is both capacity and time limited, we need the process of rehearsal in order to move the choreography into our long-term memory, where it can be stored essentially forever. Now, the process of rehearsal in dance consists of starting slowly going over the choreography without music, and eventually working your way up to full speed with the music on. So now that we've reached long-term memory, now what? Well, long-term memory actually has 2 different parts, your explicit memory and your implicit memory. Your explicit memory involves the conscious recollection of information. An example of this would be remembering what you did over the weekend, whereas your implicit memory involves the unconscious recollection of information. An example of this would be riding a bike or brushing your teeth. These are things that your brain and body seems to know exactly how to do without any real input from your mind. Now, procedural learning is a type of implicit memory that requires repetition in order for us to remember. So by this definition, dance choreography is a type of procedural learning and falls under that implicit memory umbrella. So let's look at these terms now in the context of dance. So an example of your explicit memory would be the comments that your choreographer makes in terms of choreography execution, whereas your implicit memory would be the muscle memory or motor sequence of the steps. So when we think about dance choreography, both of these types of memories can be activated and they can interact with one another. So that begs the question, why would memory suddenly fail right before a performance? Well, going back to my previous scenario, the dancers are trying to explicitly remember their choreography, when in actuality, that choreography is stored in their implicit memory. So Carl and Belock found that after a skill has been learned through procedural learning, like dance, going back to the explicit or conscious recollection of that skill can actually harm your performance. So we're thinking about our explicit memory and implicit memory, and that's causing us to forget. And that brings me to the main conclusion of my presentation. Interference here is the enemy of memory. Interference between using your explicit and implicit memory is actually what's driving us to forget right before we perform. So what should a dancer do backstage? Well, a dancer should take a deep breath, relax, and wait for the muscle memory to guide you once the music kicks in. Thank you for listening.